When Oliver Ashworth, the wealthiest and most reclusive heir in London, refused for the 10th time to dance at the most exclusive charity ball in the capital, no one could imagine that everything would change the moment when Mrs. Davies, the cleaning lady, entered the ballroom with her daughter dressed as a waitress. What happened in those 10 minutes of waltz not only shocked the 300 most influential guests in Britain, but revealed a family secret that Oliver had guarded for 20 years. Because sometimes the purest love hides behind the humblest uniforms. It was the evening of 15th of March when the gilded halls of Ashworth Manor, the 18th-century estate in the Cotswolds, filled with the cream of London's high society for the traditional spring ball. The crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections across the Carrara marble floors, whilst the chamber orchestra played Viennese waltzes that echoed between the rose-colored marble columns. Oliver Ashworth, 35 years old, heir to the financial empire Ashworth Holdings, valued at $2 billion, moved amongst the guests with the glacial elegance that had made him famous in high finance circles. His bespoke Savile Row dinner jacket and platinum cufflinks that had belonged to his great-grandfather distinguished him even among the magnates present. But it was his steel-gray eyes and controlled smile that kept him distant from everyone. The evening had begun, as always, a procession of heiresses, models, and industrialists' daughters who approached Oliver hoping to secure a dance, and therefore a place in his heart and his fortune. There was Arabella Pemberton, daughter of the textile magnate, in her Vivian Westwood gown that cost as much as a motor car. Sophia Hamilton, international supermodel, displaying Gerard jewelry worth $500,000, and Lady Catherine Worthington, aristocratic heiress, whose studied smile concealed millimetric calculations about the benefits of marriage to the Ashworths. One after another, Oliver refused them all with the same cold and distant courtesy. It wasn't arrogance, but an impenetrable barrier he had built around his heart after the tragedy that had marked his youth. 20 years earlier, he had lost his childhood sweetheart, Rose, daughter of the family's housekeeper, in an accident that still tormented him every night. Rose had been the only woman who had loved him for what he truly was, not for what he possessed. She was the daughter of Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper who had raised Oliver after his mother's premature death. Rose and Oliver had grown up together in the manor, he the young master, she the servant's daughter, but united by an authentic love that defied social conventions. The night of the accident, Rose was running towards Ashworth Manor for their 18th birthday celebration when a car struck her right outside the estate gates. Oliver had found her dying in his arms, and Rose's last words had been a promise. "Someday you'll find someone who will love you as I love you, but you must learn to recognize true love, even if it comes dressed differently than you expect." Since that night, Oliver had never danced with another woman. He attended society balls out of family and business duty, but his heart had remained buried with Rose. High society ladies courted him for prestige and wealth, but none possessed that purity of soul that had characterized Rose. Whilst the orchestra struck up another waltz, and couples moved elegantly across the inlaid marble dance floor, Oliver retreated to his usual position, leaning against the balustrade of the terrace overlooking the illuminated gardens, holding a glass of Dom Perignon champagne that he never actually touched. The whispers of guests reached him intermittently. High society ladies commented on his perpetual solitude with a mixture of fascination and frustration. He was the most desirable and unattainable man in Britain, the one every mother dreamed of as a son-in-law and every woman wanted to conquer, but who remained eternally distant like a marble statue. What no one knew was that Oliver, every evening after these society events, would visit Highgate Cemetery to place white orchids on Rose's grave. It was his ritual of atonement, a way to remind himself that he had already found and lost true love. and that everything else was merely pale imitation. But that night, fate had a surprise in store for him that would change everything. At 10:30 in the evening, whilst the party reached its peak and the orchestra played The Blue Danube by Strauss, a discreet figure appeared at the entrance to the main ballroom. It was Mrs. Davies, 52 years old, head of the manor's service staff, who for 15 years had quietly managed the maintenance and cleaning of the estate with absolute dedication. Mrs. Davies should never have been present during the ball. The service staff had the strict duty to remain invisible during society events, managing everything from the kitchens and service corridors. However, that night she had her daughter with her, and this changed everything. Beside Mrs. Davies walked a young woman of 24, with long chestnut hair arranged in an impeccable chignon, and wearing the black uniform with white apron of the service staff. This was Emma Davies, a graduate in fine arts from Oxford University, who that evening was helping her mother to earn some extra pounds to pay for the masters in art restoration she dreamed of pursuing. Emma possessed something extraordinary that transcended her social condition. Despite the waitress uniform, her bearing was naturally elegant, her movements fluid like those of a dancer, and in her hazel eyes shone a vivacious intelligence and artistic sensitivity that immediately distinguished her. When mother and daughter crossed the ballroom to reach the kitchens, an imperceptible silence fell upon the more attentive guests. It wasn't just Emma's beauty that captured attention, but something deeper, an authenticity that contrasted sharply with the artificiality of the surrounding environment. Oliver, from his privileged observation post on the terrace, immediately noticed the newcomer. For the first time in 20 years, his gaze fixed upon a woman and could not look away. It wasn't physical attraction, or at least not only that. It was as if an electric shock had run through him, awakening emotions he believed buried forever. Emma moved amongst the guests with natural grace, serving champagne and canapés with a genuine smile that illuminated her face. She didn't have the perfect and artificial beauty of the heiresses present, but possessed something infinitely more precious, an inner light that made her magnetic without effort. Oliver observed how Emma interacted with the guests. She was polite and respectful, but not servile. When a Yorkshire industrialist attempted to be inappropriate with her, Emma managed to maintain her dignity by moving away with class, creating no scenes but making her boundaries perfectly clear. She was strong without being aggressive, gentle without being weak. What struck Oliver most was a specific moment. Whilst Emma was serving hors d'oeuvres to a group of high society ladies, she heard one of them comment disparagingly about another guest's dress. Emma said nothing, but Oliver saw in her eyes a flash of compassion for the criticized woman, and noticed how she discreetly approached that lady to offer her a sincere compliment. It was a small gesture, invisible to most, but one that revealed a noble soul. Oliver realized he was observing someone who possessed that absolute rarity of genuine kindness, something he hadn't seen since Rose had died. The orchestra was about to begin the most important waltz of the evening, the traditional one that opened the final phase of the ball. As always, all the ladies present looked towards Oliver, hoping to be chosen for that dance which represented the pinnacle of the year's social event. But Oliver, for the first time in 2 decades, was walking towards a woman. His steps carried him inexorably towards Emma, who at that moment was collecting empty glasses from the buffet table, completely unaware of the attention she had captured. Oliver's heartbeat accelerated as he approached. He didn't know what he was doing, only knew that he had to speak with her, had to discover who this young woman was, who had rekindled something within him that he thought had died forever. When Oliver approached Emma, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Conversations gradually faded, laughter died away, and even the orchestra seemed to play more softly, as if everyone sensed that something extraordinary was about to happen. Emma was arranging crystal glasses on a silver tray when she felt a presence behind her. She turned and found herself face to face with the man she had seen from afar all evening, but who now stood before her with an intensity in his eyes that left her breathless. Oliver looked at her for what seemed like eternal seconds. Up close, Emma was even more captivating. Her skin had the golden tone of someone who worked outdoors. Her hazel eyes were deep and sincere, and her slightly calloused hands revealed a life of honest work that contrasted with the perfectly manicured hands of the heiresses present. With a voice that betrayed an emotion he hadn't felt for 20 years, Oliver said to her, "Would you grant me this dance?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked at him with incredulity, certain she had misunderstood. It was impossible that Oliver Ashworth, the wealthiest and most influential man present, was asking her, a waitress, to dance. Yet his sincere gaze and extended hand left no room for doubt. Around them, the world of London high society was experiencing collective shock. Arabella Pemberton, who had hoped all evening to be chosen, visibly paled. Sophia Hamilton pressed a hand to her chest, as if she had received a blow to the heart. Lady Catherine Worthington stared at the scene with her mouth agape, unable to believe what she was seeing. Comments began to spread like ripples. "Has he gone mad?" whispered the Countess of Bedford. "A waitress! A waitress!" murmured the Earl of Wessex. "This will be in all tomorrow's papers," predicted the Duchess of Marlborough bitterly. But Oliver heard none of this. His eyes were focused only on Emma, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and wonder. Emma knew that accepting this invitation would mean crossing an invisible but insurmountable line that separated her world from Oliver's. Mrs. Davies, who had witnessed the scene from afar, approached her daughter discreetly with the intention of removing her from the embarrassing situation. But when she saw Oliver's look, something stopped her. In those gray eyes, there was no condescension or whim of a bored rich man. There was something Mrs. Davies recognized immediately. It was the same look she had seen 20 years earlier, when Oliver looked at Rose. Emma, after what seemed an eternity, gently placed the tray on the nearest table. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she replied, "It would be an honor, Mr. Ashworth." Teachers, Oliver offered her his arm with the gallantry of a gentleman from another era, and together they moved towards the center of the dance floor. Each step resonated like thunder in the surreal silence of the ballroom. The guests stepped aside, forming a perfect circle around the dance floor, as if witnessing an event of historical importance. The orchestra, after a moment of uncertainty, began to play a slow and melodic waltz. Oliver placed his right hand on Emma's waist with infinite delicacy, whilst with his left he took her hand. The contact was electric for both of them. When they began to move, something magical happened. Emma moved with a natural grace that made every step of the waltz flow like water. She had never danced in a grand ballroom, but she had in her blood that musicality which transformed every movement into poetry. Oliver, who hadn't danced for 20 years, immediately found the rhythm, as if his body had been waiting precisely for that moment to live again. As they danced, the world around them seemed to fade away. Oliver looked into Emma's eyes and saw the same purity, the same authenticity he had loved in Rose. But Emma wasn't a copy of Rose.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
She was something new, unique, unexpectedly perfect. The dance lasted 4 minutes, but for Oliver and Emma it was like an eternity of perfection. When the music ended, and they stopped in the center of the floor, the ballroom's silence was total. Then, slowly, applause began. Not enthusiastic, but respectful, as if everyone had understood they had witnessed something special. Oliver escorted Emma to the edge of the dance floor and kissed her hand delicately, as was done in ancient times. "Thank you," he said simply. But in that word, there was a world of meaning. Emma blushed and lowered her gaze, then returned towards the kitchens accompanied by her mother. But before leaving the ballroom, she turned one last time towards Oliver. Their eyes met across the crowd, and in that look was the silent promise that this would not be the last time. The 24 hours following the ball were a true earthquake in London's high society world. The news that Oliver Ashworth had danced with a waitress spread through the capital's drawing rooms like wildfire, fueled by social media and the gossip of the ladies who had been present that night. The morning papers carried the story with sensational headlines. The Billionaire and Cinderella, Scandal at Ashworth Manor, proclaimed the Times. Oliver Ashworth shock, dances with domestic staff, declared the Telegraph. Even international tabloids seized upon the story, transforming that dance into a media sensation of European scope. Oliver, seated in his office on the 42nd floor of the Shard that housed Ashworth Holdings headquarters, read the newspapers with a mixture of annoyance and determination. He had never cared about high society gossip, but this time feelings he hadn't experienced for 20 years were involved. The telephone rang incessantly. His secretary, Miss Thornton, informed him that he had received calls from 20 media outlets, 5 television programs, and countless high society friends who wanted to know what had possessed him. But the call that struck him most was from his uncle Reginald, the only remaining family member and minority partner in the company. Reginald Ashworth, 70 years old, was the embodiment of the most conservative family traditions. He had always hoped Oliver would marry a woman of their social class to consolidate economic alliances and maintain the purity of the family lineage. The call was brief, but cutting. "Oliver, I hope you've realized the unseemly spectacle you provided last night. Our family has a reputation to maintain." But Oliver no longer felt the weight of others' expectations. For the first time in 20 years, he had experienced something authentic, and he wasn't willing to give it up for social conventions. He decided to do what his heart suggested: find Emma and truly get to know her. Information about Emma Davies wasn't difficult to obtain. She had lived for years in her mother's house in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts, had earned her fine arts degree with first-class honors whilst working nights to pay for her studies, and dreamed of specializing in the restoration of ancient artworks. She was a girl of solid values, raised by a single mother who had sacrificed everything to give her an education. Oliver decided to present himself at her house without prior notice. When he rang the bell of the small flat on the 3rd floor of a 1960s building, it was Mrs. Davies who opened the door. She recognized him immediately, and her expression became worried. "Mr. Ashworth, if you've come about problems related to last night—" "I've come because I would like to know your daughter better," Oliver interrupted with disarming sincerity, "not out of curiosity or whim, but because last night I felt something I haven't experienced for a very long time." Mrs. Davies looked into his eyes and saw the same vulnerability she had noticed the night before. She was a wise woman who had raised her daughter by teaching her to recognize sincere people from false ones. In Oliver, she saw pain, loneliness, but also a sincerity that reassured her. Emma appeared behind her mother, dressed simply in jeans and a white jumper, her hair loose over her shoulders. Without the makeup and uniform from the previous night, she was even more beautiful, with that natural beauty that needs no adornment to shine. "I've read the newspapers," Emma said with a firm voice. "I'm sorry if our dance has caused you problems." Oliver smiled for the first time in 20 years with genuine happiness. "The only problems it has caused me are those that come from not being able to stop thinking about you." The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. Oliver and Emma spoke of art, of dreams, of life. He discovered that she painted in her spare time, that she loved classical music, that she read Keats and dreamed of restoring the frescoes of the Sistine Chapel. Emma discovered that Oliver, behind the facade of the impenetrable businessman, was a cultured, sensitive man who knew art history better than many university professors. When Oliver left, both knew that something profound had been born between them. But they also knew that the entire world would row against their love story. In the days that followed, Oliver and Emma began to see each other regularly, always away from the spotlight and the places frequented by London's high society. They met in small cafes in the boroughs, walked through the city's lesser-known parks, visited museums during the quietest hours. Each encounter consolidated what both had intuited from the first moment. They were made for each other. Oliver rediscovered through Emma's eyes the beauty of simple things, the pleasure of authentic conversation, the joy of sharing intellectual passions without ulterior motives. Emma saw in Oliver not the unattainable billionaire, but a wounded man who needed to rediscover the capacity to love and be loved. The relationship, however, had to face mounting pressure from every direction. London's high society had unleashed a subtle but relentless campaign against Emma. In the capital's drawing rooms, poisonous gossip circulated. She was a gold digger. She had planned everything to seduce Oliver. She was a woman of easy virtue, who had used charm to manipulate a vulnerable man. The economic pressures were even more direct. Mrs. Davies was dismissed from several historic clients' homes, officially for staff reduction, but in reality because aristocratic London families didn't want to be associated with the mother of the woman who was ruining Oliver Ashworth. Emma saw her application for the Masters in Restoration rejected without official explanation, but with the clear feeling that her name had become uncomfortable in academic circles linked to wealthy families. Oliver realized what was happening, and his reaction was immediate and decisive. He used his influence to protect Emma and her mother, but above all, he made a decision that shocked the British financial world. He publicly announced his relationship with Emma through an exclusive interview in The Times. The interview was a masterpiece of sincerity and dignity. Oliver recounted his 20-year loneliness, his inability to find authentic love in a world where everything is measured by money, and how Emma had restored his capacity to experience genuine emotions. He didn't apologize for his choices, didn't justify himself for breaking social conventions, but proudly claimed the right to love whomever he chose. "True love knows no social classes," he said in the interview. "Emma has taught me that richness of heart is worth more than any financial fortune." The reaction was explosive. Half of high society condemned him as a traitor to family traditions. The other half admired him for the courage to defy conventions. But what struck most was the reaction of ordinary people. Thousands of letters of support arrived at the newspaper's offices. Thousands of positive comments on social media transformed Oliver and Emma into symbols of a love that transcends social barriers. Emma, for her part, demonstrated a class and dignity that silenced many criticisms. In a counter-interview, she declared that she had never sought Oliver's wealth, but had found in him a soulmate with whom to share intellectual and artistic passions. She spoke of her future projects, her desire to contribute to the conservation of British artistic heritage, her will to build something meaningful together with the man she loved. The turning point came when Oliver decided to take the definitive step. He not only wanted to be with Emma, but to do so in front of the entire world, openly challenging those who opposed them. 6 months after that fateful night of dancing, Oliver organized what would become the most talked-about social event of the year, a second charity ball at Ashworth Manor, with a precise objective that he kept secret until the last moment. The invitation was extended to all the most influential personalities in Britain: businessmen, politicians, artists, intellectuals. But this time, alongside the names of the economic elite, appeared also those of ordinary people who had distinguished themselves through social, artistic, or cultural merit. Oliver wanted the world to see that a person's value isn't measured by their bank account. On the night of the ball, Ashworth Manor was even more splendid than usual. The gardens were illuminated by thousands of LED lights, creating a fairy tale atmosphere The orchestra had been replaced by an ensemble of internationally renowned musicians, and every detail was perfectly curated. Oliver arrived alone, supremely elegant in his dinner jacket, but with a serene and determined expression that contrasted with the tension of the preceding months. The guests observed him with curiosity, wondering what he had in mind and whether Emma would appear. The answer came at 10 o'clock precisely, when the doors of the main ballroom opened and Emma made her entrance. But this time she wasn't wearing the waitress uniform. She was dressed in a midnight blue velvet evening gown, specially designed for her by an emerging stylist, which enhanced her natural beauty without ostentation. Her hair was arranged in an elegant chignon, adorned with a diamond tiara that had belonged to Oliver's mother. The silence that fell upon the ballroom was different from that 6 months before. It was no longer shock or scandal, but genuine admiration. Emma moved with the grace of a princess, but with the simplicity of one who had never forgotten her origins. Oliver went to meet her halfway across the ballroom and offered her his arm. This time, when they headed towards the dance floor, there were no murmurs of disapproval, but respectful applause that grew in intensity until it became an ovation. When they began to dance, the magic was repeated multiplied by 1,000. Oliver and Emma moved as if they had been created to dance together, in perfect harmony, not only physical, but spiritual. Around them, other couples joined the dance, creating a tableau of elegance and beauty that none of the guests would ever forget. But the most emotional moment came when the music stopped, and Oliver, before all the guests, knelt in the center of the dance floor, producing an engagement ring that had belonged to the Ashworth family for 5 generations. The words he spoke rang clearly throughout the ballroom. "Emma, you have managed to restore light to my life when I thought it was lost forever. Will you marry me?" Emma's response was a yes, spoken with a firm voice and eyes bright with emotion. The applause that erupted was thunderous and genuine. Even the most skeptical had surrendered to the force of such authentic love. The wedding was celebrated 3 months later in the chapel of Ashworth Manor, with a ceremony that blended aristocratic tradition and genuine simplicity. Emma wore the wedding dress that had belonged to Oliver's mother, but enriched with details that reflected her artistic personality. After the wedding, Oliver and Emma founded together the Rose Foundation, in memory of the first girl Oliver had loved, dedicated to supporting meritorious young artists from disadvantaged families. Emma became curator of important art exhibitions, realizing her dream of working in the world of restoration and artistic conservation. Their love story became legend, cited as an example of how authenticity of feeling can overcome any social barrier. Oliver had learned that true love isn't found in high society drawing rooms, but in the hearts of people who know how to see beyond appearances. And every year, on the anniversary of their first dance, Oliver and Emma waltz again in the ballroom of Ashworth Manor, reminding the world that authentic love is the only wealth that cannot be bought, but only recognized and treasured by those with hearts pure enough to welcome it. If this story has made you believe that true love can overcome any social barrier, and that beauty of soul is worth more than any material wealth, like and share this video. Oliver and Emma have shown us that sometimes miracles happen when we least expect them. Don't miss the next episode, where you'll discover another incredible story of how destiny can change life in a single instant. Subscribe and hit the bell to never miss stories that will make you believe in the magic of love.